Good morning. Welcome to the Weathering the Storm workshop. This episode is on thriving in the new normal, and we're going to be focusing today on preserving cash flow and the things you can do to help drive your business forward in these times. And so we have several guests with us. We have Steve Neighbors is with us. He's a business consultant and turnaround practitioner. He is the guy that goes in and really helps work with companies when they're kind of in dire straits. Maybe the IRS has locked the doors, or they've hit a plateau and they need to be moving forward. And so he has quite a pedigree and quite a number of certifications. Officially, he's a certified turnaround practitioner. He has a master's in forensic financial analysis, post-grad certification from MIT in strategy, also a post-grad certification from Harvard as a turnaround specialist. Also master negotiator. And so Steve is going to share with us about preserving cash flow and negotiating with suppliers and that sort of thing as well. We also have Soleil Fortin with us, and Soleil is the senior supply chain manager with Happy Family Organics. They are a firm you've probably heard about here in the area that specializes in baby foods and different products in that arena, and they've been really on a great growth curve and doing a lot of great things. She has a bachelor's in economics from BSU. She's also currently working on her master's degree and has really been instrumental in helping Happy Family accelerate their growth as they've been moving forward. We also have my co-host, which is Cheryl Adams. Cheryl is a partner with Rectify Partners. Rectify specializes in a variety of things, but really helping businesses in their area of need, bring in the expertise to help come alongside them and help them grow and manage their business as they're accelerating. Cheryl's done a number of things. There's a long list of things to add there. She's also a CFO and does fractional CFO services as well for companies, as well as turnarounds and a variety of things. And then my name is Brent Otkin. I'm with Profit Creek. I'm a professional EOS implementer. EOS is short for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. So if you've read the book Traction, you're probably familiar with a little bit about EOS and what that does. It's an operating system to help leadership teams get on the same page with their vision, get the tools, the traction that accountability and discipline to move forward in their business and help the team become a very healthy, strong, functional team so that you can really get what you want from your business. And so what we'd like to do to kick off is a couple of housekeeping things. Is if you have any questions, please bring those up. You can put them in the Q&A, or you can also put them in the chat if you'd like. Q&A would be the easiest for us, but chat works. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves and to the panelists. And then we're here to help you. And so the whole point of this particular session is to, now that we've kind of gone through the coronavirus and the shutdown, and we're coming back out of that, and we're saying, okay, now we're trying to bring our businesses back forward. We've had these different things happen in our business, and we've been trying to grapple with all that. Cash flow is a huge element in keeping our businesses running and keeping us going. And your P&Ls may look great, or your balance sheet may look great, but cash is king, as they say. And so we really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to preserve cash flow, manage that, and make sure that we're moving forward the way we need to. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Steve. Steve, why don't you share a little bit about your ideas on preserving cash flow and negotiating with suppliers?
Well, I think I would like to first start with the 50,000 foot level and simply say that every person deals with who am I and why am I, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously. Most people probably subconsciously. But a company is also an entity, and there's the aspect of who am I and why am I as a company. And not all companies deserve to exist. That sounds really harsh, but a lot of people fight to keep a company that may or may not continue. You may be the best buggy whip operator, manufacturer, distributor, whatever, but there becomes a time when buggy whips are no longer really relevant in the marketplace and you have to re-identify yourself. And there's been a number of companies where I've gone in and they're trying to maintain the status quo and technology has passed them up. Or the world has changed, social mores have changed. There have been impacts into society that, be they slow or big and quick, you have to reanalyze your business. So you need to start with the new norm, if you would. That's the term that everybody's come up with. There's a new norm, but it won't be a norm for long. The world is changing faster and faster. And so we have to learn as a company and as a person to adapt and change and be able to read what's going on. And so the first thing I do is I find out whether a company is tied to its industry. What is happening in the industry? Show me how you are keeping in step with what are the mega trends coming down and what are the local trends that are impacting your industry. And then how do you benchmark yourself against your industry and against your competitors? And then as you get into a time of stress, and every company goes through stress, literally every company lives and dies. Even the brand name companies that we know forever have reinvented themselves. They're a new company. They're new owners. They're new. They may keep the name, but they're into a new core offering. So learning to adapt and change is really a very important part of any business that wants to continue. As you run into stress, everybody's heard the term cash is king. And so you really need to preserve cash. You need to identify those things that are really crucial. You need to kind of freeze. In the turnaround world, we call it a 13-week cash flow. So we manage week by week the cash flow. Other people call it a 3-month cash flow. So you really need to understand your pro forma, estimating by your best efforts of getting data, reading the market, reading the industry. What does the future look like for you? What are my sales going to be? What are my costs going to be? And do a pro forma, a projected financial statement. From that, you do a projected cash flow. Those then give you the tools to identify whether or not you really can succeed and continue. If not, you have to say, I either have to terminate this business and take what resources I can and go do something different, or how am I going to change so I can adapt and have a pro forma cash flow that is reasonable. Once you have a reasonable cash flow, pro forma cash flow, that then becomes the tools for you to negotiate with your creditors. So every business is like think of it as like an ox cart. And a manager is managing an entity with character. And that's the cart. That's the business. It has a personality. It's a specific entity all on its own, generally, and it has a goal, an objective, and it defines itself. This is who I am and why I am, and so it tries to get all these different stakeholders to pull in the same direction. And so you want your suppliers pulling in the direction of who I am and why I am. You want your employees pulling in the direction of who I am and why I am. And your customers help identify who you are and why you are. The government entities are a stakeholder. Your owners are a stakeholder. So everybody that has any stake within a company are putting some kind of risk to help you define who you are, why you are, and to accomplish that. And once things go awry, people start trying to tear apart the cart. They all start pulling in different directions in a self-protective mode. And so what management and owners of a company, big or small, need to do is manage those stakeholder responsibilities. They've given their word. They need to be, that company needs to be a company of its word. It needs to keep all its commitments. There are times it can't keep its commitments. And so it has to go back, reanalyze, here's the cash, here's what I can do. I deserve to exist, I don't deserve to exist, and I need to do an honest appraisal. If I deserve to exist, then here's how I can go forward and keep my word to the best of the ability that I can. And it's better than if I liquidate. It's better than the alternative. And so once you've got that pro forma and cash flow that shows that you deserve to exist, and it's in the best interest of your creditors and other stakeholders for you to continue, you then come up with your plan. In the turnaround world, we call parking the gorilla. So we say all the past accrued bills and expenses, we park. And now we're going to say, how are we going to cash flow the future? And once we know we can cash flow the future, we then say, okay, what excess cash can we now address to the gorilla? And the gorilla is that parked debt, that which you owe. So there are things that are really critical that you have to keep going on, you keep paying. You can't park employee wages, for example. You'll lose your employees. You can park your landlord generally. You can park suppliers. You can negotiate. But you need to understand your cash flow capabilities so you keep the commitments you make when you park the gorilla and you say, here's how I'm going to take care of it. Here's how I'm going to take care of your rent. Or I can only pay you 20 cents on the dollar, but here's how I'm going to do it. And here's what will happen if I have to liquidate. If you can't pay the whole gorilla, it's best to have a third party do your negotiations. There's a lot of good negotiators out there, a lot of good people that understand special assets and banks or various creditors or landlords. A lot of good commercial real estate agents can work with you on your landlord. But you can't take care of the gorilla and fund the future in a stressed environment. So that's why you got to park the gorilla, and you've got to figure out how to address the gorilla in the most responsible way you can. There's one other aspect I want to talk about in the assets. So parties, all stakeholders are not equal in their assets. So a bank, for example, may be secured in the inventory in first position. And there may be a supplier that has sold inventory to you and he's waiting for it and it's passed. So the bank is not going to be happy in the negotiations if you're liquidating their assets to pay an unsecured creditor. If somebody's calling you all the time and pounding on your door, you need to know what they truly are secured in and what they are not secured in. And rattling the legal threats isn't really what you need to be concerned about. What you need to be concerned about is what assets, what creditors are secured in what assets, and how do I not take Peter's assets to pay Paul? And if you can put together a pro forma and cash flow that shows that you can and deserve to exist, that you can take care of the gorilla, and you will not violate the secured position of each creditor, you have a winning strategy. And that's my big 50,000 foot level. So thank you, Brent.
That's great. I was writing feverishly. Steve, talk a little bit about maybe a little bit more on the negotiating side of working with creditors. You know, if you come through this and you've got that gorilla, right? Is there some other strategies or some other practical things that I might be able to do if my business is in kind of a crunch? Maybe I'm not quite ready to call on a third party to have to negotiate per se. I'm not like ready to shut down, but things are tight. Is there some things I should be doing or could be doing on my own to help kind of alleviate some of those? Or should I just not try to do that and just go straight to the third party?
I think the mistake is to go to the third party and make a commitment you can't keep. So I think the first step is tell the third party, look, I'm in a stress circumstance. I need 21 days. I need 2 weeks. I need a month. I'm going to get all plan figured out, and then I'm going to come back and tell you how I can go forward and be a responsible be a responsible business. And so big mistake that people make is they respond to the phone calls or the pressure or the legal effort without really knowing who's secured and what assets, and they end up making commitments and or making payments to people that are down the pecking order in secured position, and that can be the kiss of death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there can be that guilt, right? Of I committed to owing you this, and I want to pay my bills and that sort of thing. But it's almost worse if you do that and not keep the business running and generating the cash that it needs to be able to pay everybody else off.
Yes, so I like to have a business think like it's a person. I've given my word. And so now I'm in a stress situation where I can't fulfill all my obligation to my stakeholders. So I don't want to give false word again. I want to go through, figure out what I can and can't do, and then tell everybody, here's the best I can do. And here's the pecking order, because here's the security position of each party. And here's how I'm going to try to make it right by you. And here's what I can and cannot do for you. And then keep your word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's so smart to stop and make a plan as opposed to just reacting. Yeah, we've got to get out of the craziness for a little bit, and like you said, kind of, do I deserve to exist? Put that pro forma together. Do I have a plan moving forward to keep funding the future, and then tackle the gorilla later? So
I've got a couple other little comments I think that might help people. People that are putting pressure on you generally are not the ones that are in a secured position. And that's the reason why they're pounding, they're making the phone calls, or they're screaming, I'm going to get legal. The people that are in secured positions generally know they're in a secured position, but they do want to see how you're going to responsibly handle it and manage it. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is there's a time element. People are frustrated, and sometimes they want to act in anger, and a little bit of time, that cooling off period, is important. I need 21 days. I need 30 days. I'm going to get back to you with a plan that I know I can do. So I think that's, letting people have a cool off period is a really important factor as well.
yeah, exactly. Great. Thank you, Steve. I'm sure we'll probably have some questions at the end, so hang tight. So
Okay.
we're gonna switch over to Soleil. Soleil, as I said, is the senior supply chain manager for Happy Family Organics. And Soleil, I'd like you to kind of share a little bit about what it's been like in your world, in what you've been dealing with, and kind of some best practices that you guys have learned as you've kind of been braving this crazy time, and any other things that might tie in off of what Steve shared.
Yeah, great.
So give you the floor. There you go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Apologies in advance for my dog, who will probably bark during this. Okay, so as Brent mentioned, the overall goal of this segment is to share examples of what we've learned about working with our suppliers and vendors to secure our various supply chains during these times. So I want to start by going over a decision framework that really captures the balancing act that we face as businesses in supply chain, and that is the supply chain triangle of service, cost, and cash. We're really focused on cash today. But do want to talk a little bit about those trade-offs, because those are really some of the decisions that we've had to take. So, for example, service being something like an on-time and full metric. If you want to put metrics to some of these things, cost of goods sold would be one of your cost metrics. Inventory turns could be something that represents your cash metric. So for example, with new product innovation, we might be focusing on delivering the best customer solution. And with our mature products, we might be focusing on operational excellence and keeping costs down. So there's a different framework you can take to each of the decisions when we're making these trade-offs. So I want to talk through some specific examples of some of the COVID impacts that we've been seeing and how we've navigated so far. Steve did talk through negotiating payment plans. And I think what's interesting there, what came up for me is, what opportunities do you have to work with your suppliers directly? He did mention, the businesses that you're working with that are more secure. I would consider our business more secure. We have a parent company, so cash flow isn't a concern, although we do have measures that we have to hit for the year. So it's definitely something we're navigating inside. But one thing that we saw was one of our partners needed to ask for 50% upfront payment on every purchase order in order to secure the chain at a 14-week lead time, where we'd previously been paying upon receipt of the goods. So it was a big change to terms, but that open engagement really allowed us to assess what are the risks to the supply chain, and we took the decision to prioritize service as a trade-off to that cash, because it's a very critical supplier for us. And so that decision was, although impactful, it was very clear that we needed to take the decision to support our supplier at that point in time with the cash that they needed. One thing that Steve mentioned that really I do want to touch on, though, is how it does put us in a nervous position to understand how are they going to be responsibly managing the business going forward. So from a business continuity standpoint, we do need to start to evaluate new suppliers, because it is one of those situations where, although we're able to work with them, we do need to stay in close contact on what we're going to be doing to ensure that business is being run appropriately going forward. So I guess just really understanding, openly engaging with suppliers and vendors, and remember that supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link, and so that there's always that opportunity to bring in that, take advantage of the fact that we all rely on each other, and we're really here to support one another, I think, in a supply chain. So, and along those lines of payment plans, that has a lot to do with what you're buying. So stock levels. One of the questions we looked at talking about was how to know what type of stocking levels you should have. During these times, there are a lot of different decisions that go into what your stock levels should be. Safety stock typically is a cover for forecast accuracy. I think during these times, we absolutely have to consider supplier performance as part of our safety stock coverage. And so knowing that there are supply chain uncertainties, that typically would mean that you're going to be increasing stock levels and reducing cash at the same time. So what I found from our business was, okay, secure the supply chain, but you don't get any extra inventory dollars. You still have to hit the same cash target. So interesting. How do we do this? And the approach that I took was looking at our on time and full measurements from suppliers. So that kind of represents the pre-COVID needs. If my suppliers are typically a week late, this is how much I'm going to carry for that specific supply chain. Whereas now we're in anticipation mode, looking at what needs could we have given the potential impact. So prioritize what needs you need to cover for. So for example, we looked at our entire raws and packs, where they come from. Do we have dual sourcing? What are the risks if this country shuts down? For example, we were impacted by India shutting down for 3 weeks. We were given a 4-hour notice. So these are things that, they're going to happen without the ability to anticipate. So just being ready for that. So in some cases, what we did was really look to say, is this coming from overseas? Is there a dual source? Those types of questions. And we really only ended up increasing inventory for banana because we identified it was a critical product and is dual source, but coming out of the same country. So the impact could be large. So in that case, we increased stock there. There is a trade-off, and we do need to be able to take that down somewhere else. So there are a lot of different ways that we were able to evaluate and manage to do that. One of the things that we were also able to do was not cover for other areas where we knew that we could find another source should we need to. There was a healthy spot market, or we understand that there's growing cycles in many different regions. So those are just things to consider when you think about, like, what do you need to cover for and what don't you need to cover for. And let's see, when qualifying new suppliers, if you are looking at the spot market, I would say just to ensure that the quality and customer service are top of mind. Supply chain disruption that has anything to do with a new supplier that doesn't meet your needs, it's a relationship, and so understanding what kind of supplier performance you can count on, I think, is an important tip. And yeah, so those are kind of some of the things that we've done. As I mentioned, increasing safety stock in our areas where there was a bigger impact. And then there was actually an opportunity to capture some cost savings. So what we found was the logistics costs have actually come down. They're on their way back up just recently, but there was a period there of about 6 weeks where the spot market prices were better than our contracted prices. So I would say too, if you do have contracts, a lot of times what's happening right now is commodity pricing is all over the board. So it's a great opportunity to look at the commodity pricing and try to understand if there are any opportunities to not buy from who you're contracting with, or use those spot market costs to negotiate lower costs. Anything that you can capture right now in cost savings, really.
So that's great. It's I love how you kind of talked about that triangle of cash, service, and cost, and trying to balance which one do you want to focus on. Now, did you do this I imagine as a team? How kind of talk us through how you went through that process of determining those things?
Yeah, so definitely a team effort. What we find is that, so we've got procurement, who's really kind of heading up what is the cost, trying to get the best cost. From supply chain, we're usually really focused on the inventory and having that supply, along with top line growth, along with sales. And then our finance team holding us accountable on cash, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we really appreciate that, and I think that's what works so well about our team, is we are able to have those conversations that say, okay, we might need to say yes on these terms for our cereal supplier. It's a big hit to pay 50% upfront, 14 weeks ahead of time, but we're absolutely able to keep what is most important to our business, and that is service level. We believe that the population that we're serving is a vulnerable one. They are babies. So we definitely, and there's some product lines that are a lot more sensitive. So formula is one of those things where we really never want to run out. We do whatever we can to ensure that we've got the formula. It was really interesting too to see, was the stock in the right place? So our customers couldn't always find the product, even though it was out there, depending on where they were, which can be challenging. And it's a big pivot towards to go from brick and mortar to the brick and click and e-commerce models. And so we saw huge spikes in demand there. But yeah, definitely it's all a negotiation. We use our sales and operations planning alignment process. We've got a process unique to Danone, our parent company, that works really well in coordinating all of the teams and making the best business decision and aligning, what are the risks in the forecast? How are we covering that from a supply perspective? And is that going to deliver the financial targets that we are committing to, to the shareholders on?
Yeah, that's so important to have that alignment, right? A lot of times what we see, especially in smaller businesses, as they've grown and they've kind of siloed, and so sales is kind of off doing their thing, and operations is off doing their thing, and finance is doing yet another thing, and they're disconnected. And that coordination and alignment between those is critical to really bring the business forward and adapting quickly. You've had to adapt very, very quickly to all these changes. So perfect. Thank you. That was great. Again, we'll probably have some questions for you as well. So. Well, let's keep going so we don't run out of time here. I'd like to pivot over to Cheryl. Cheryl, like I said, is a partner with Rectify Partners. And Cheryl, why don't you share a little bit more about some cash flow techniques and and that type of thing. So
Perfect. Brent, thank you, Soleil and Steve, for your valuable input that you provided today. And so I'm going to go and put a presentation up on the importance of cash flow and putting an actual cash flow tool together. Brent, if you'll go ahead and put it on the screen for us.
yeah, I'm working on it.
Fantastic. One of the things we will be doing is we'll be providing you with the ebook after the presentation today that will give you some valuable tips and tools, as well as we'll also be providing you with a cash flow template, which you guys will be able to use.
Do I have you on the right screen?
And you do. Perfect. Thank you. So the importance of a cash flow. We know that during COVID-19, it's causing unparalleled problems, especially for a lot of small businesses. Now more than ever, it is essential that you know your cash flow, like both Soleil and Steve talked about, and the factors that impact that cash flow. Every business knows, of course, like Steve said, cash is king, and we all know that to be able to survive. But yet it's alarming at the number of businesses, only about 33% don't even use a cash flow tool to manage their cash today. So I'm going to walk you through the importance and some metrics you'll need to be able to do to evaluate an effective cash flow tool. So next slide. Perfect. So some of the top actions your business should do now to assess its cash flow. Evaluating your cash flow during this crisis starts with looking at both your current and future expenses, as well as your future income. Both are clearly interrelated, where your income enables you to afford more of those expenses and be able to grow. But if you also, like many businesses during this crisis, your income has dropped or altogether has completely stopped. A lot of those businesses are able to open back up. So they're right in the middle of trying to find areas and ways in which they can open back up and start generating some of that. So some of those top actions you should be taking that we're going to talk about, and I'll walk you through the methodology of how to evaluate your expenses to determine which ones should be eliminated right away and which ones you need to be able to keep. So number one, next slide, Brent. Perfect. The first thing you'll want to do is, when you see a drop in income, is you'll want to just immediately cut the biggest expenses to stop your cash flow bleeding. This may not always be the wisest way to cut expenses. So before you simply go and start cutting expenses, what you wanted to do is divide your expenses into musts and wants. The musts are expenses that you must have to keep your business running. The wants are those items that are nice to have, but they're not exactly essential. You'll then want to prioritize the musts and the wants to evaluate the impact that they will have on your business. Once you've broken down your expenses into musts and wants, then you'll want to go in to assess the options of what those are. So you'll want to divide them into 3 categories, which is kind of what Steve and Soleil talked about, where do you want to renegotiate the terms, where you'll go in and talk to your vendors and negotiate either a lower price, lowering and looking at examples like lowering your cell phone bill, your internet bill. You maybe want to cut, pay cuts. You want to maybe look at benefits and other expenses as well. You also may want to request late payments. You can go and talk to and discuss with your vendors by simply asking them if you can pay and extend out those terms for 60 to 120 days to go ahead and be able to keep the product in the door, but also being able to continue that ongoing relationship with that vendor, as well as keep your cash flow. Some of those expenses you're going to want to go ahead and put completely on hold. You can either pause them for a certain period of time while you evaluate other areas in which way you want to cut. Now, once you've taken the action and made your action list of your must, wants, and your needs, you'll go into, which is number 2, which you'll want to review your future income. Knowing your future income with some level of certainty is essential in running your business. It determines what level expenses you can support, whether you can make your payroll, your rent, and helps you decide on how to invest in the future of your business. This process is directly related to your expenses evaluation that you just did in step number 1. You will need to perform both together, both your income and your expenses, to make those decisions on your cash flow. As a small business owner, you will always want to understand the dependence you have on your customers and what happens, unfortunately, if you happen to lose one or more of them. So first you will set up, do the same similar thing you did in your expenses with your customers. You want to set up that cash flow dashboard, which will provide you a way to evaluate your income in 30, 60, 90 days. Once you'll make that customer concentration list, you will then go in and decide what the next steps are. Do you go ahead and offer that customer discounts? You'll also want to look at and have discussions with them on what their future forecast looks like, because that's going to determine a lot of where you focus your business today and also in the future. When you look at offering those discounts, you also want to look at whether you keep full price items or whether or not you go ahead and look at special discounted times, seasonal, as well as days of the week to increase those revenue streams. You also want to look at potentially accepting late payments from your customers, because you know they're also going out to their vendors and asking for those late payments. So really looking at your income and whether or not you can allow for your customers to also accept late payments and what that looks like to your cash flow. You then oftentimes will also want to look at your concentration list and look at the bottom of the list of the customers. Do you go ahead and let them go? Do they impact you material and overall revenue, or do they not significantly impact your business? You don't want to spend all your time keeping some of your bottom customers that don't provide that margin, to focusing on your top customers and how you support and can you continue to support their future forecast so that your cash flow is aligned with what those customers' demands are. Then once you do that, you'll go into number 3, which is you want to stress test your profit and loss. Now that you've gone through and evaluated a complete evaluation of your expenses, and you've complete evaluation on your current and future income, now what you'll want to do is effectively look at and run a set of scenarios to see the most impact on what that does to your cash flow. And by doing that, what you'll do is you'll go through and you'll look at what if scenarios. On the expense side, you can see the impact on those options, whether or not you negotiate new terms, whether you go ahead and reduce those expenses, hold off on those expenses, whether you delay payments, whether you cut payroll cuts, or whether or not you look at providing other areas of where you're going to go ahead and need expenses. We're seeing that a lot with COVID right now. Is a lot of the small businesses did not need to buy potential masks, cleaning materials that they're needing to do now during COVID. So you want to look at how do you keep your employees as well as your business safe during these trying times. Then you'll go in and you'll look at the what if scenarios on your income. Can you use this model of any changes to your income, including the discounts that you're giving your customers, what that late payment impact is, the negotiations, potential loss of business. And by using these what if scenarios, you'll be able to look at what the immediate impact is going to be on your cash flow in that 30, 60, 90-day time frame. Then number 4, you'll want to go ahead and some of the most important things are calculating your cash burn rate. understanding what that cash burn rate could be, the difference between your business surviving, being able to survive salary cuts, layoff, and potentially, if you don't know what that business cash burn rate is, potential business closure, which we don't, none of us want to see. And such cash has always been king, but the statements is even true during cash burn rate, because it can be measured both monthly, weekly, and daily, as well as any period of time. And how you want to calculate that is you'll want to look at is how do you continue to spend at the same level as that you are doing today in the next 3 to 6 to 9 months, and how much can you afford, and what does that burn rate look like moving forward. The cash flow template we'll be giving you today has those calculations in there and will help you do this assessment. By looking at the gross cash burn rate, you simply add the total cash outflows for a specific period of time that you're looking at, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days or beyond, and divide that by the number of periods. Once you have the amounts calculated, you can use this information to help you continue to build your cash plan and what options you need to do to manage both in your current situation as well as in the future. The second one is you'll look at net cash burn rate, is by simply adding the total cash inflows by the total of cash outflows for that specific time. So if you're looking at the future 90 days, 100, 12 months from now, you'll want to look at what does that net overall cash burn rate look like, so that you know what your future is. It will help you also determine and decide what is some of those things you need to do now that's going to affect you 9 months down the road. And that's really what's important of looking at a cash flow, is really looking at how does my today's business management and choices I'm making today really affect the future and where my business is going to be able to thrive in months down the road. And then and number 5 is then you're going to go ahead and perform that cash break-even analysis. Once you've calculated both and looked at your scenarios, you've looked at your burn rate, the break-even analysis identifies how to become profitable, but to determine your price strategies, how to look at new products, new services, and also kind of what Soleil went into it and Steve did is what is that inventory holding period, as well as stocking levels that you're going to want to look at. Your cash break-even analysis helps you solve for the amount of cash you need to be able to target for your business. You'll also be able to look at ways in which when you're going to need to potentially take out additional lines of credit or loans to be able to support your business for the future. By using that cash break-even analysis, it's very useful in making some of those major changes and being able to assess what the shock to your business that occurs, which is what we're seeing right now in a lot of the situations and with this COVID. And by the scenario that I kind of put an example on the screen is how much revenue is required to cover our expenses for the next 3 months. So with that is you'll start by looking at your fixed expenses, which include your salaries, your leases, your rent. And the example is, $18,700 per month. Now what you'll want to do is you'll want to look at what that variable is. By keeping things simple, we estimate that variable expenses required to sell at least $56,000 of product in the next 3 months is $30,000. Now, if we add up a lot of our fixed and variable expenses over the next 3 months, we have the $86,000 in expenses. In this amount, we'll need to sell to keep a neutral cash position and cover all of our expenses for that period. That is your break-even point, and that is what you'll need to be able to provide income to be able to cover all of your fixed and variable expenses for that period of time. A break-even analysis will identify the target revenue that you will need to focus on. And why it is so important is because it will help you guide you in creating a plan of attack to achieve that. Whether you'll need to go after new business whether you'll need to go ahead and provide more product and bring more of that inventory in-house, or whether you need to, if you find oftentimes a lot of businesses are seeing right now, is that they're having to actually also pivot their company and pivot some of the services that they're providing, because right now we see that a lot with restaurants and bars are having to sometimes look at, we saw that with a lot of the bars is doing curbside. They had to pivot from being able to have patrons inside to being able to still continue to generate that revenue by looking at different options in their business model to still continue to provide that revenue stream and being able to focus. So having that cash flow, both the burn rate and the break-even analysis, it really helps you focus on where your business needs to go and things that you need to do to manage those ups and downs that are going to be happening. So some of the five things and mistakes that businesses do, and businesses when they're doing their cash flow management, is oftentimes we look at our online bank balance as a decent indicator of things that are happening, but unfortunately it doesn't provide a visibility for the future and upcoming days. It only looks at current situation and cash flow right now. So having that cash flow really helps you look at the future versus just continuing to deplete the funds that are in your bank account right now. Another one is really, not having that expense controls. Everyone is aware that the importance of cost cutting during a downtime economy is important. However, a lot of the key lies in effectively determining the right level of controls to ensure the company's critical functions are not being impaired. And one of the best methods of that is to make sure that you're looking at expense control by looking and examining, which we did with the musts and the wants, is looking at where your growth and your income declines, so that way you can adjust and make sure that you're putting those expense controls in place. And one of the areas that I've seen in a lot of small businesses when it comes to expense controls oftentimes is credit cards. We often go, okay, we'll just charge it right now, and then when the bill comes in, it's a huge amount, and we're not able to pay that and hold up to those obligations. And so really looking at and making sure that you've got expense controls in every area of your business is very important. Also, some of the other areas is not being able to manage your accounts payable and your accounts receivable. Having those collection policies in-house and making sure that you're following up with and not allowing those receivables to age out really also oftentimes hurt your organization more, because you're not able to bring that cash flow in by not really managing and putting a good collection policy in place. And like Soleil talked about is making sure that you don't have too much money tied up in inventory. Looking at, is there inventory that's been sitting on the shelf for far too long that you can potentially discount, as well as there's a lot of different companies out there that will buy, sometimes unfortunately pennies on the dollar, but some cash flow is better than none, is being able to sell some of your aging inventory that you're not able to turn to some of these inventory brokers. Also help to be able to bring that revenue and that extra income and be able to turn that revenue and inventory over. And the number 5 is evaluating old information. Making sure that your cash flow metric is up to date is vital in making sure that you're making those and managing those decisions that you're moving forward with. And having old, outdated information does not allow for you to go ahead and make those critical decisions that you're doing. And making sure that you're up to date on your forecast with your customers. That is also one of the most vital things. Keeping those open lines of communication with your customers during those times is so important, because if they're seeing their forecast decline, you've also then got to be able to manage your vendors in that appropriate time frame. So one of the things I wanted to be able to do is provide both the Excel template for you guys today, which you'll be receiving in an email after today's session, but also Rectify Partners has put together an amazing group of individuals to put a task force together that will come in and spend an hour free with your organization assessing your business, your cash flow, and they will be providing you valuable key areas and input of where your business should be focusing right now. So if you'd like and you're interested in having that free 1 hour assessment with Rectify, please visit rectify.net and set up a time for them to come and meet with you and your business. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for today.
That's great. Thank you. And that that assessment is super valuable because you have a fantastic team of very qualified people. So
We
that,
do.
sometimes you read, oh, free assessment, you know, and it's like a waste of time. This is a great free assessment.
Yep.
So
You know, one of the things that the group has looked at is how do we give back to businesses that are struggling right now and be able to give back to the community. And so we've all given our time to be able to do that and provide some valuable tools and templates that businesses will be able to have after that assessment's done that they'll be able to use to manage their business.
that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. So let me switch gears a little bit and just kind of take off from what you shared, Cheryl, and actually what Steve and Soleil has also shared today. Is we identify those areas that we need to focus on, right? We've got to be focusing on cash. We've got to look at the expenses. We're trying to manage all this stuff, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. And so the important thing is to really say, what are we looking at that's either going to increase our revenues or is going to decrease expenses? And all three of the panelists here have talked about that today. The challenge is, do we have anybody that's really owning in those different areas? And so the exercise that you can do, and you could even do this right now if you have a piece of paper, but I'd encourage you to do this with your team, is sit down with your leadership team and just take 5 minutes and just everybody individually write down a list of things that they can think of that would either increase revenues or decrease expenses in the business. So take 5 quiet minutes, everybody go through that, and then come back together and share that list of items, and basically put it up on a whiteboard and write out what do we think could increase revenues, decrease expenses, and then go through that list and just kind of refine that and really determine is this really what we should be looking at or not, and really bring that list of probably 20 to 30 items down to maybe 6 to 10 items that you can focus on. But then what you want to do at that point is to say, okay, so we've got this item that we're going to focus on. Who owns it? And you need to assign an owner. EOS is all about accountability and discipline. It's all about getting things done. And so the way you do that is by having somebody that's accountable for whatever needs to get done. In this case, what we're talking about is whatever that driver is. If we have somebody that's accountable for it, then they are there to make sure that keeps moving forward. And if it's not, we know who to talk to and how to address that to make sure it does start going forward. The point of note on that is only one person can be accountable. You need a single name of accountability for that item. If more than one person, then nobody's accountable. And this happens throughout your business, but especially in this area here. And so focus on what items you have, find an owner for that, but don't stop there. You also need to come up with a measurable. What is the number that we're looking for that is going to help us either increase revenues or decrease expenses? And what's the target that owner is shooting for? Now, the owner of that measurable may not be, or that item may not drive everything about that. They may not be the only person involved in that, but they're the person that's accountable to the organization to keep that on track. And so when you've uncovered what those are, you've got the owner, you've got the number, the goal, you want to make sure that you're measuring that, staying on top of that. And so I talked about what we call our level 10 meeting in a previous session. And so I encourage you to go back and check that out. Reach out to me individually. I'd be happy to walk you through that and share that with you. You can also go to profitcreek.com/level10. I have a little page on that and a video that talks you how to do that. What that's about is how do we drive that accountability and make sure on a weekly basis that we're staying on top of those numbers and making sure that those things are getting done like they're supposed to be getting done. And if for some reason something falters, we can quickly identify that and take care of that. One of the things that I liked about what Cheryl, you presented was that break-even analysis and how it helps you look ahead and see what's coming, and you can tackle an issue before it becomes an immediate problem. So often in business, we're so consumed with what we're doing day to day that we can never get above the noise, and so we just take stuff as it hits us. And so the more we can predict, the more we can look ahead and use these tools like what Steve and Soleil and Cheryl talked about. It allows us to be a lot more predictive of our business and proactive and not reactive. So you might be wondering, okay, so what are some examples of things that would increase revenues or decrease expenses? So one client, for example, looked at their pricing and said, man, we could bump our pricing by 5%. It wouldn't really make an impact on our consumer. They're going to be resistant. They're not going to be affected by that negatively. We're not going to get a bad reaction from that, but it immediately adds 5% to the bottom line real quickly. So pricing, you may be able to bump your price up a little bit. You might be able to focus on your cost of goods. So we talked a lot about this today. It was negotiating with your suppliers. And Soleil mentioned that maybe there's an opportunity with pricing the way it is to renegotiate some contracts, and you could save some money there as well. You save a couple percent, that goes right to your bottom line. Another is like a service company where they had a lot of drive time between service calls. And so what they were able to do is just focus on better scheduling their calls so that they were able to reduce the drive time. They were able to reduce their drive time by 50%, which was a huge cost savings, but it also increased their service level because they were able to get to more places and be more responsive. So those are just some ideas of things that you can do to identify and manage areas that can increase your revenues or decrease your expenses. We call this the 8 cash flow drivers. It's one of the tools in the EOS toolbox. There's 22 tools, I believe, in the EOS toolbox that really help you manage and drive your business. And so this is just one of those, and it's a quick run through. We'll have information in the ebook as well. But if you have any questions and you want to reach out to me specifically, feel free to do so. What I'd like to do is go ahead and bring all the panelists back. We had everybody shut their cameras off so we could stay focused on the individual speaker. But I'd like to have everybody, all the panelists, bring their cameras and microphones back on. I'd like to open it up for Q&A. So we've got a couple of questions here. Gina has one here. It says, how to identify a quality negotiator? What type are we looking for? And I think, Steve, this was kind of more directed to you during your presentation. And if you'd like to, before we jump into that question there, Steve, if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand on the panel there by your name, and we'll open it up and allow you to talk too if you'd like to share something. So, Steve, how would you identify a quality negotiator?
So I believe a good negotiator has a couple of elements that really lends himself to doing well. At Harvard, in the negotiation class, the whole structure is win-win. And so there's all kinds of different styles. There's the Arabic style, really confrontational, demanding, whatever. But the negotiation that is worthwhile is the one that lasts, that stays in place. And so you want someone who can stay above the fray, be emotionally detached, who has the background to understand all the different issues, understands financial issues, cash flow issues, how every little element that is on the table to be discussed, how that impacts ultimately that cash flow and the business ability in the future. Every business value is really based on its future cash flows. And so I know a lot of appraisers try to, I'm an advanced business appraiser. I know most appraisers try to look back to the past 12 months. And to me, that doesn't really have the value. The value is, I mean, it's an element in thinking, but it's the future cash flows that creates the value of the company. And so you need to have a negotiator that really understands all those elements and probably has the connections with the industry, connections with, within your local community that it has some credibility. You have a third party negotiator representing you, you want it to be a person of integrity.
Yeah, it is kind of a representative of your organization. So
Yes.
And then another question for Soleil is when did you begin adapting? So how soon into the pandemic did you guys start adapting?
Yeah, so it was about 10 weeks ago, pretty early on. Our inventory was all but wiped out in March. And so we had kind of already put in place biweekly check-ins at that point. But, we also aligned early on the fact that we didn't expect incrementality, that it was just going to be a peak and then a valley followed by a valley from the forecasting perspective. So really most of the actions that we put in place were to cover the supply chain and any potential disruptions that we would see there. In a lot of cases, we have really long lead times, so we're still, anticipating some of that inventory that we built up. But again, so it's very dynamic, but we started planning and we're following it really closely as of about 10 weeks ago. And we'll continue that. We're actually in conversations now about asking the group for extra cash to potentially be prepared for another wave of, the flu season this fall. So that's kind of where we're at now, is just, when do we need to react in order to be ready for a potential second wave, which we don't anticipate would be as impactful. We've all learned a lot more about what the impacts look like. So it's definitely, there's less risk now just because we all know more. But we still want to be prepared for that.
If I may weigh in, there's a couple of things I've done with inventory that may be of value. I have, in one case, the bank was secured in the inventory, but I was able to get the bank was only 50% invested in the inventory. And it was $2 million of inventory. So I was able to sell it back to the distributor for 75%, and then give that 50% to the bank, and it gained 25% for the company. And the bank was happy to get the cash, and it gave a little bit of cash to the company. That's an anomaly, but it's something to consider.
Yeah.
And the other thing to remember is don't liquidate inventory that may be secured by a bank or something, and then use that money for something else.
Yeah. Yeah, really have to be careful of how you move forward in these times, especially if you're in that position. So great. Well, I don't see any other questions. If you have any other questions, now's your time. Last call on questions. Otherwise, I don't want to keep everybody just for the sake of keeping you. We're all available for questions and follow up later if you have anything else that you think of after this.
I do have one last thing to share.
Perfect.
So statistically, 100% of the businesses will eventually fail, but 60% will fail in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And 85% of the reason those failures is failure of management to act. And so I find all the time that management doesn't want to face some hard issues, and they need to do that. They need to act. They need to act timely, and time is not your friend. So that's my last thought.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a lot of why we wanted to pull these together, is to help people as they're in these situations to draw on some of this expertise that they wouldn't normally have access to, and open their thinking to some of these concepts that may be totally foreign to them.
Yeah.
Cheryl, go ahead. Do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, and with the ebook that we'll be sending out, we'll have Soleil's contact information as well as Steve. So if anybody wants to follow up or have additional questions, you can also, contact them directly, or if your business is needing help from any of us.
Great. And our next session is coming up June 2nd, which is 2 weeks from today. Cheryl, why don't you give a teaser on what we're going to be covering on that one? Kind of dovetails with this one nicely. So
Yeah, we'll be the next one on June 2nd. We'll be looking at alternative focuses on finance. Now that all the businesses have been able, a lot of businesses have been able to get the PPP, and now that those funds are starting to come to a close, what is some of the other loans or options of financing out there that businesses are providing, or that small businesses can maybe potentially go after? We're definitely seeing, and I'm sure Steve, you've seen this a lot too, is banks and special asset lenders and stuff have really changed the criteria and the things that they're looking at right now, with the potential and the high risk for banks right now on lending. And so what is some of those alternative options? And so we will have a couple alternative option financing individuals that will be on there, as well as we'll have a couple asset bankers that will talk about, if you happen to be going in that path, how to kind of work through some of those issues.
great. So yeah, please join us. Please register for the next one, as well as share this with your friends and your network. We want to get the word out. These are just an opportunity for us to give back. We're trying to provide helpful information. So we want to get this to as many business owners and leaders as possible so they can take advantage of this. So please share with your social media networks and your different connections you have. So thanks so much for attending. Steve, Soleil, thank you so much for your input. That was great, and I think it was very useful.
Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.